So I know the title of this video is very aggressive, but I promise I'm not talking down or talking bad about you. I'm legitimately asking the question because really, I don't know the answer and I need your help answering it. So for those of you who don't know, I've mentioned in previous videos that I personally don't like multi-scale 6-string guitars. And there are people who agree with me and people who also disagree, which is great. I want this video to become sort of like a forum where we can respectively educate each other and share our opinions about multi-scale 6-string guitars in particular. So feel free to share this with a friend. I'm going to start by explaining scale length briefly so we're all on the same page, and then I'm going to give you some examples of what I believe are good and bad uses of multi-scale guitars. And at the end of the video, I have a few questions that I hope you'll answer in the comments below. Okay, so let's begin with a quick summary. Scale length is the distance between the nut and the bridge, and one of the most common scale lengths for electric guitars is 25.5 inches, which is very common on Fender guitars. Changing the scale length of an instrument has several impacts. For example, if you go from the Fender scale of 25.5 inches to the Gibson scale of 24.75 inches, the same string gauge will feel slightly less tight, and the space between the frets is going to be slightly smaller. The neck pickup tone is also going to be slightly darker and or warmer. The important thing to understand at this point is that a Gibson scale of 24.75 inches and a Fender scale of 25.5 inches, both of these guitars can play fine in standard tuning, many variations, they can both intonate perfectly and everything like that. So choosing between the two is largely going to be personal preference. Now, if you decrease the scale length and the string gauge, the pitch increases. And although it isn't super common, there are guitars tuned higher, or you can just think of a mandolin for our example. Smaller scale length, higher pitched instrument. The opposite situation is something you're probably more familiar with. For example, a baritone guitar is often tuned the perfect fourth lower than standard, and the scale lengths are usually somewhere between 27 and 30.5. Then, of course, a bass is tuned a full octave below the guitar with a scale length somewhere between 30 and 35. And up until this point, you should have noticed that each of these stringed instruments have straight frets, and the scale length is the same for every single string. A multi-scale guitar has slanted frets so that you can have a different scale length on different strings. And there's a logical reason for this. If you ever looked at a piano and wondered why it has that very strange shape, well, it's because a piano is a multi-scale length instrument. If you look inside, you'll notice that the bass strings have a longer scale length, just like our bass guitar, and the higher strings have a shorter scale length, just like a mandolin. Having scale lengths that match the strings help to ensure we're able to intonate accurately and have the right feel and timbre. Now, I don't know when this happened, but multi-scale guitars became synonymous with heavily distorted guitars and chugging. But the bands that I grew up with in the early 2000s, they didn't really use these instruments to tune low. Slipknot, Korn, Meshuggah, Fear Factory, all of these bands used normal guitars or 7-string guitars and just tuned down, and they didn't have multi-scale instruments. In fact, the first multi-scale guitar I ever saw was played by Charlie Hunter. And he's been doing the 7 and 8-string multi-scale thing since at least the 90s. Of course, he's not a metal guitarist. I believe the first guitars he played were custom made by Novak's Guitars, and now he has his own company, Hybrid Guitars. But his use of multi-scale guitars actually makes a ton of sense. A lot of the time he's playing bass strings and bass notes on the lower side, and guitar or baritone on the higher side. This is an example of when a multi-scale is absolutely required. Charlie Hunter is basically playing a bass and a normal guitar in one instrument at the same time, which is crazy. And you'll also notice that his particular style is catered to the instrument. He's not doing normal guitar stuff. Trades come with pluses and minuses. Simply put, since fan frets aren't the norm, they are at a bare minimum going to feel a little bit weird to most players who aren't used to them. And as you'll soon see, you may also lose the ability to play certain things on the guitar. There is another common argument people make about multi-scale guitars, and that is that they're more ergonomic. But this can't be a statement that we apply in all contexts. Number one, there isn't a standard multi-scale measurement. So which version are we claiming to be more ergonomic and for whom? And number two, even if we picked just one multi-scale, let's say 25.5 to 26.5, there will still be differences based on where a luthier decides to place the straight fret. That determines the fan angles. Just look at these two guitars. They have the exact same scale length measurements, but the fans are totally different. But Let's ignore those potential issues for a moment. Even though I don't love multi-scale guitars, I can admit that I found two things more comfortable: bar chords on lower frets and a few things on higher frets. The issue is, to make these things ever so slightly easier, I'm losing a bunch of other chords and comfort in other situations. So for me, it's just a bad trade, which is why, in my opinion, multi-scale should be reserved for special instruments and players like Charlie Hunter and our next example, and perhaps you. Let's cover another example of a great multi-scale guitar, the RC1 by Ormsby. This is, of course, a signature model guitar that was designed specifically for Rusty Cooley, who is, by all accounts, an insane shred machine. It has a scale length of 25.5 on the high strings and 26.15 on the low E string. So having the low E string at 26.15 absolutely makes a difference when intonating whilst down-tuned. Now, to be frank, this guitar feels absolutely crazy to me. It doesn't even feel like a normal guitar. But who cares what I think? This is a signature guitar that was designed with Rusty Cooley's comfort in mind. It even comes set up tuned to drop C, which must be his preferred tuning. So in some ways, we can almost consider this a special case. This is a special guitar. It's something in between a normal 6-string and a baritone. And if you want an Ormsby with straight frets, 25.5 inch scale, and a Floyd Rose style bridge, you can get that also. Now, before we move on to the stuff that I consider frustrating, I need to make a very quick but important point. You don't need an extended scale length guitar to tune to drop C. As a quick example, this is the Mark Holcomb PRS signature model. It has a 25.5 inch scale length, and it comes from the factory tuned to drop C. Also, the band Periphery that Mark Holcomb is from, they frequently tune even lower than drop C, all with normal guitars. So yes, someone may prefer a multi-scale guitar when tuning down to drop C, but it is definitely not a requirement for proper intonation. Okay, and now we move on to the frustrating stuff. We have this 6-string headless designed by Aristides. You can get it in a fixed bridge or a floating trim, any pickups you want, any color, any custom inlays. They even describe the neck as the perfect Goldilocks zone for everyone to find comfortable. But this guitar only comes with a 25 to 26.1 multi-scale length. Now, really think about that for a second. The signature guitar for a band that almost always tunes to drop C or lower, they have a 25.5 inch scale length, a signature guitar. And then we have the very uniquely designed Rusty Cooley guitar that is made for someone who prefers to be tuned in drop C, and that one is 25.5 to 26.15. The Aristides guitar has a more aggressive fan than the RC1, which is designed to be drop tuned. I just don't understand it. You can customize this guitar in every possible way you want, but you have to have frets that might feel strange to you personally. And you see these guitars and everyone assumes they're only for gent players and people who down tune, but if there was a straight fret version, maybe we could erase that assumption and perhaps more players can find comfort in playing these like normal guitars. By the way, if you're looking on my channel and you're wondering where the RC1 signature guitar review is, well, it's only on Patreon. I've had that guitar for more than 6 months, but I still haven't done a YouTube review. Similarly, I just got this guitar in. It's absolutely amazing, made by Aviator Guitars. It's my first ever tune guitar. I don't know when a review of this guitar will be up on YouTube, but there is already one on Patreon. So if you want to get my first impressions completely raw off the cuff, that will always be found on Patreon, and I always make those videos the second I get a new guitar. So subscribe there if you're interested, or if you just want to support the channel and chat with us on Patreon, we'd appreciate having you. So now we move on to another example. Strandberg guitars have 25.5 inch scale on the bass side and 25 on the treble side. So this fan fret is so subtle, it's almost useless. The only potential benefit is that the high E string will be slightly more slinky as you bend, but you could also just achieve that feel by using a slightly higher gauge high E string. And some of you may think that the fan fret design is more ergonomic, but my question is, more ergonomic for whom? Now, to be fair, the Strandberg's fan fret is so subtle that there are only a few small instances where things become strange for me personally. But since the fan fret also isn't helping anything, I also don't see the reason why we need to have it on the guitar to begin with. So I don't want to go on much longer. There are similar companies like GOC guitars that don't offer straight frets, and there are other companies like Kiesel who have both options, which I believe is better. So to conclude this video, I'm just going to throw the question out to you. In the comments below, please answer one or all of these questions in as much detail as you possibly can. Number 1, do you find a multi-scale guitar useful, and if so, when? Give me some real detail here, like what the actual scale lengths are, what do you tune to, and what do you like about it? And the second question is, if you're a traditional guitar player, would you try a guitar like a Strandberg or an Aristides if they had a straight fret option? Or are they just too funky for you? I'll be in the comments as well, so share this video with a friend and let's get some good discussion going. I always forget to mention this, but if you're interested in actually playing the guitar as well as talking about gear, you'll want to check out my newsletter below. It's totally free. Everyone who joins seems to really enjoy it.